Rain lashed against the Pentagon's glass facade, streaking down like silver tears. Inside the grand marble hallways, footsteps echoed in rhythm with the storm outside. Men and women in uniform hurried past. Crisp salutes exchanged, their expressions composed yet tense. The air carried that unmistakable scent of coffee and command, authority in motion. At the center of it all stood General Alexander Monroe, a woman whose very posture commanded respect. For shining stars gleamed on her shoulders, reflecting the fluorescent lights above. Her reputation stretched far beyond the military, a leader who had turned chaos into victory on countless fronts, who carried both steel and compassion in equal measure. But this morning, something was different. As she briefed a group of senior officers on a humanitarian operation, her voice faltered. A faint tremor ran through her hand. She brushed it off, continuing to speak, her gaze steady. Then suddenly, her knees buckled. The papers slipped from her grasp and scattered like white birds across the floor. "General Monroe?" One officer gasped, rushing forward. Her eyes rolled back. Chaos erupted. "Call the medics. Now!" Within seconds, paramedics sprinted through the hall, the clatter of their equipment piercing the silence. They placed her on a stretcher, her lifeless hand hanging loosely over the edge. The sight froze everyone in place. The nation's strongest woman suddenly fragile, human, and silent. 2 hours later, at the Walter Reed Military Hospital, a convoy of black cars arrived under heavy rain. The hospital's automatic doors slid open as a stream of uniforms flooded in. Doctors, specialists, and aides scrambled for orders. The word had spread fast. 4-star General Monroe, critical condition. Inside, in the polished hallways of the hospital, Ethan Cole quietly pushed his mop and bucket along the corridor. His navy blue janitor uniform hung slightly loose on his thin frame. A faded photo of a smiling woman and a little girl peeked out from his ID badge. The world around him was loud, doctors shouting, alarms beeping, stretchers rolling, but Ethan worked in silence, calm and steady. Years of night shifts had taught him how to disappear into the background. He paused as he saw the rush of white coats through the glass window. Behind them, General Monroe lay unconscious on a hospital bed, surrounded by blinking machines and urgent voices. He didn't know her personally, but he recognized her. Everyone did. Her speeches were broadcast across the nation, her presence at military ceremonies always commanding, inspiring. And now she looked so still. Ethan's heart tightened. He glanced toward the small clock on the wall, 10:43 a.m. He still had 2 hours left on his shift. He dipped the mop again, but his eyes kept drifting to the window. One of the nurses brushed past him, muttering, "They've called in 22 specialists. Cardio, neuro, trauma, everyone. Nobody knows what's happening." Ethan nodded silently. He continued down the hall, stopping only when his phone buzzed. A message from Sophie lit up the screen. "Daddy, did you eat breakfast? Miss Brown says hi. Red heart." A smile tugged at his lips. His daughter's cheerful messages were the one bright thing in his long days. He texted back quickly. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Working hard. You be good, okay?" Then he looked up, hearing a sudden commotion from the ICU. Through the glass, one of the monitors flatlined. Nurses swarmed, shouting commands. "Push one of AP. Clear. Clear." The defibrillator pad sparked. A jolt ran through the general's body. The sound made Ethan flinch. "Come on, ma'am. Come on," one of the doctors whispered. Beep, beep, beep. The monitor came back to life. A collective sigh filled the room. Ethan exhaled, pressing a hand to his chest. He turned back to his cart and resumed mopping, but the image stayed with him. A powerful woman, helpless beneath hospital lights. Later that evening, after most of the chaos had calmed, Ethan entered the quiet corridor near the ICU again. The floor gleamed under the soft light, his reflection moving alongside the mop strokes. He stopped when he saw a small shape by the waiting room window, a child's drawing left on the chair. A woman in uniform with big stars on her shoulders stood next to a little stick figure holding flowers. In uneven handwriting below it read, "Get well soon, General Monroe. You protect us." Ethan smiled faintly. He picked it up carefully and placed it on the small side table outside her room, next to a vase of white roses. He stood there a moment longer, watching her through the glass. Tubes and monitors surrounded her, but beneath them, he could see the faint rise and fall of her chest, a battle quietly being fought. The night nurse passed by, nodding politely. "Rough case," she murmured. "They still can't find what's wrong. She's not responding to anything." Ethan's brows furrowed. After all those doctors? The nurse shrugged helplessly. Sometimes the body just shuts down, even when the mind's stronger than steel. She walked off, leaving Ethan standing there with the quiet hum of machines filling the space. He thought of Sophie's bedtime words the night before. "Daddy, heroes never fall. They just rest before they save more people." He didn't know if she was right, but as he looked at the woman behind the glass, the general who had carried the weight of a nation, he hoped she was. He whispered under his breath, "Hang in there, General." Then he turned off the hallway light, leaving only the soft blue glow of the ICU monitors illuminating the corridor, the only heartbeat in the silence of night. Morning sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, falling across silent corridors that still smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered, puddles on the pavement, dripping eaves, and the heavy tension of waiting. News had spread across every TV screen. In America, 4-star General Alexander Monroe in critical condition, 22 specialists working around the clock. Reporters crowded outside the hospital gates, their cameras flashing as security guards kept them back. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with urgency, not just medical, but national. In the ICU, Dr. Helen Vargas, the hospital's chief of medicine, stood over Monroe's bed, her eyes red from sleepless nights. "She's stable, but we still don't know what caused it," said one of the doctors, adjusting the foredrip. "Keep running the panels," Vargas replied sharply. "Blood work, neurological, cardiac. I don't care if we have a test for every rare syndrome in the book. Something's missing." Around them, machines hummed steadily. Monroe lay still, her skin pale against the stark white sheets. The strong jawline that once commanded entire units now rested quietly, unmoving. Dr. Vargas looked at her with something more than clinical concern. She'd served under Monroe's leadership years ago during a humanitarian mission. Monroe had saved her convoy during an ambush in Kabul. To see her like this, vulnerable, voiceless, was unbearable. Down the hallway, Ethan Cole polished the marble floors outside the ICU. The reflection of his mop glided across the surface like ripples in water. To others, it was just another morning, but to him, something felt heavier in the air. He overheard bits of conversation as doctors passed. Autoimmune collapse. Could be a rare toxin exposure. No, it doesn't explain the histamine spikes. He didn't understand the words, but he understood exhaustion. Every face that came out of that room looked the same, drained, frustrated, defeated. He took a break beside the vending machine and pulled out his old flip phone. There was a voice message from Sophie. He smiled and pressed play. "Hi, Daddy. Miss Brown," said the Lady General on TV, "is very brave. I told her my daddy works in the same hospital. Did you see her? Did you help?" Ethan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Oh, sweetheart," he murmured, smiling to himself. "And Daddy," Sophie's voice continued, "if she's a hero, someone to protect her now, right? That's what you always say. Everyone needs someone." Ethan's eyes softened. Her words lingered like a gentle echo. He thought of his late wife, Mia, who used to work as a nurse before cancer took her. She'd had a way of noticing things others miss. Small details that made all the difference. "Sometimes healing starts when you pay attention to what everyone else ignores," she used to say. Ethan looked through the ICU window again. Maybe that's what Monroe needed now. Someone to really see her, not just treat her. By mid-afternoon, the hospital grew even busier. Teams rotated in shifts, charts were exchanged, and tests returned with inconclusive results. "She's rejecting every medication protocol," said Dr. Vargas in frustration, running her hands through her hair. "Her vitals spike randomly, then drop without cause. We've checked every system, and nothing adds up." Another doctor, older and tired, muttered, Maybe it's psychological trauma. She's been through wars. The body remembers. Vargas turned sharply. This isn't trauma. This is physiological. We're missing something physical. Ethan, wiping the glass door nearby, pretended not to listen, but the tone of their voices made him glance up. He saw the doctors walking away, shoulders slumped. He moved closer to the window, watching Monroe's hand twitch faintly against the sheets. A nurse adjusted her fore. The faintest crease formed between Monroe's brows, as if she were in pain. It sent a chill down his spine. Later that evening, the hospital quieted again. The daytime buzz faded into the hum of night monitors and distant footsteps. Ethan stayed late, cleaning the ICU corridor. The flickering fluorescent light above buzzed softly as he wrung out his mop. He paused near Monroe's door again, drawn by a quiet instinct he couldn't explain. Through the glass, he could see her profile, elegant still, a hero trapped inside silence. The sound of rain began again outside, tapping gently against the window. Dr. Vargas appeared, rubbing her temples, holding a clipboard stacked with notes. She noticed Ethan lingering and offered a tired smile. "You work too hard, Mr. Cole." He straightened. "Just doing my job, ma'am." She sighed, glancing at Monroe. "I wish I could say the same." He hesitated, then asked softly, "She's not getting worse, is she?" Vargas looked at him curiously, then sighed again. "No, but she's not getting better either. It's like her body's fighting something invisible." Ethan nodded slowly, unsure what to say. "I'll pray for her," he murmured. The doctor smiled faintly. "We'll take all the prayers we can get." She walked off, her footsteps fading down the hall. Ethan finished his shift and stepped outside into the rain. The smell of wet asphalt filled the air. He climbed into his old pickup truck and sat for a moment, watching the raindrops race down the windshield. The world outside looked blurred, uncertain. He thought of Sophie asleep at home with her stuffed rabbit, of Mia's framed photo on the mantel, and of the woman lying motionless in the hospital. A stranger, yet somehow not a stranger at all. He whispered into the empty cab. "You've carried the weight for everyone else. Now someone's got to carry it for you." His phone buzzed again, a message from Sophie. "Good night, Daddy. I said a prayer for the general. I think she'll hear it." Ethan smiled faintly, tears pricking at the corner of his eyes. "Me too, sweetheart," he whispered. "Me too." As the truck engine rumbled to life, lightning split the clouds overhead. A bright streak across the night sky, as if the heavens themselves refused to give up on the fallen general. And in the quiet hum of that storm, something stirred, a feeling that her story wasn't over yet. Not while someone still believed enough to look closer. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the sky a low blanket of clouds that seemed to mirror the mood inside the hospital. The air in the ICU wing was thick with fatigue. Nurses whispered, doctors exchanged clipped instructions, and the steady rhythm of machines filled every silence. The scent of antiseptic mixed with the faint bitterness of burnt coffee. For 3 days, General Alexander Monroe had remained in the same state, breathing shallowly, eyes closed, life hanging by a thread. The nation watched, but inside these sterile walls, she was just another patient fighting a silent war. And the doctors? They were losing. Ethan Cole wheeled his cleaning cart quietly down the corridor, careful not to make noise. His reflection glided across the polished floor, distorted by the shine. He'd learned not to intrude, to be invisible, but his mind wouldn't rest. He found himself drawn again and again toward the general's room. Every time he passed, he noticed something new. One morning, he saw faint blotches on her neck, tiny red marks that seemed to come and go. Another day, he caught the twitch of her fingers, irregular and uneasy. Once, when a nurse changed her foreline, he thought he saw her flinch ever so slightly. It wasn't much, but to Ethan, small things mattered. He'd spent years noticing the little details no one else cared about. A scuff on the floor, a leaky faucet, a flickering light. He'd also watched his late wife, Mia, do the same when she was a nurse. She'd once saved a patient by realizing a medication allergy no one else caught. "Pay attention to what doesn't fit," she used to say. Sometimes the smallest thing is the loudest truth. Her voice echoed in his head now. That afternoon, while cleaning near the nurse's station, Ethan overheard a conversation between two young nurses. "I don't get it," one said, sighing. "Every test comes back normal. No infection, no stroke, no heart issue." "Yeah," the other replied, lowering her voice. "But her skin keeps reacting weird. Look at these new spots. They said it's nothing, but—" Ethan stopped mopping. His gaze flicked toward Monroe's room. Red marks. Reactions. Something stirred in his memory. A night from years ago, when Mia had rushed home from a double shift, exhausted but excited. She'd saved a patient suffering from sudden breathing failure. Everyone thought it was cardiac arrest, but it turned out to be a severe latex allergy. She'd found the clue in a tiny line in the patient's file. They kept using latex gloves, she told him. The poor man was being poisoned every minute, and no one saw it. Ethan froze mid-step. Could it be the same thing here? He pushed his cart closer to the trash bin beside Monroe's door. Without touching anything directly, he peeked inside. Among the discarded wrappers and gauze, he saw several empty latex glove packages. He frowned. Latex gloves? But hospitals were supposed to use hypoallergenic ones for sensitive patients. Surely the doctors knew, unless— He turned toward the wall chart outside Monroe's room. It was thick with pages, updates scribbled in medical shorthand. Near the back, almost faded, one line stood out in older ink. Allergies. Latex. Mild reaction noted in 2007. It wasn't underlined. It wasn't flagged. Just a quiet, buried note, lost under years of updates. Ethan's pulse quickened. He looked back at the trash bin, then at the general lying inside, her fingers twitching again, red blotches visible beneath the four. He knew he could be wrong. He was a janitor, not a doctor. But what if he was right? For the rest of the shift, he couldn't focus. His mop strokes became uneven, his breathing shallow. He imagined walking up to Dr. Vargas and saying, "You're using the wrong gloves." But what then? They'd laugh. Or worse, he'd be fired for interfering. A single father couldn't afford that. He needed this job. For Sophie, for their tiny apartment, for every meal they shared together. But as he passed Monroe's room one last time, something inside him refused to stay silent. He thought of Sophie's words. Someone has to protect the hero now. He thought of Mia's voice. The smallest thing is the loudest truth. He looked through the glass one more time. Monroe's breathing was uneven, her skin paler, with a faint red tint around the fore. His decision came quietly like a heartbeat. That night, after the doctors had changed shifts, Ethan walked up to Dr. Helen Vargas's office. She sat behind her desk, rubbing her temples, charts spread like fallen leaves around her. He hesitated at the door. "Dr. Vargas?" She looked up, surprised. "Mr. Cole? What are you doing here? It's past your shift." I just wanted to mention something," he began cautiously. "About General Monroe." Her brows furrowed. "You shouldn't concern yourself with patient matters." "I know, ma'am," he said quickly, "but I've been cleaning around her room. I noticed she has some red marks, and I saw the old note in her file about a latex allergy. But the gloves—" Dr. Vargas raised a hand. "Mr. Cole, I appreciate your concern, but please leave medical details to the staff." His heart sank. "Of course," he murmured, backing away. "I'm sorry." He turned to leave, but before walking out, he placed a folded note on her desk. In neat handwriting, it read, "Check for latex allergy. It might explain her reactions." He left without another word. Hours later, long after Ethan had gone home, Dr. Vargas found the note beneath a stack of papers. She read it absent-mindedly, then froze. "Latex allergy?" she whispered. She grabbed Monroe's file, flipping rapidly through the pages until she found it. The faded line confirmed it. Her heart began to pound. "Get me the lab team," she shouted, bursting out her office. "Now!" Nurses and technicians rushed to her side. Blood samples were drawn, histamine levels tested. The results came back within minutes. Abnormally high histamine spikes. Vargas's voice trembled. "It's an allergic reaction. She's been exposed for days." The order went out immediately. All latex materials removed. Synthetic gloves only, antihistamines, and epinephrine administered. Inside the ICU, the monitors beat faster, a rhythm strengthening, not fading. Monroe's chest rose with steadier breaths. Her color began to return. Dr. Vargas pressed a hand to her mouth. "Dear God," she whispered. "We almost lost her because of a glove." Meanwhile, home, Ethan sat beside Sophie's bed as she slept, the soft hum of the rain outside. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, "Mom would be proud of you, kiddo. You reminded me to see what others missed." In the hospital across town, a 4-star general's heartbeat found its strength again, because a janitor decided to notice what no one else did. The rain had stopped, but the air over Washington still carried the scent of thunder, that quiet, heavy stillness after storm. Inside Walter Reed Military Hospital, a different storm was brewing. By morning, whispers had started to ripple through the corridors. Something had changed overnight. General Monroe's vitals were improving. Nurses exchanged cautious glances. Doctors poured over new reports, their faces reflecting disbelief. For the first time in days, the numbers looked hopeful. Dr. Helen Vargas stood by Monroe's bedside, scanning the monitor. The general's pulse was steady, her oxygen levels stable. The redness on her skin had already begun to fade. "How did we miss this?" she muttered to herself. Her assistant hesitated. "Ma'am," the latex allergy note was buried deep in her old file. "No one's used latex in years, except some of the older supply closets." Vargas exhaled slowly, guilt pressing against her chest. She nearly died because of something so small. But another question burned even stronger in her mind. Who left that note on my desk? Meanwhile, Ethan Cole arrived for his early shift, unaware of the ripple effect his small act had set in motion. He parked his old truck under the oak tree near the employee entrance, balancing a lunchbox and Sophie's handmade card that said, "World's Best Daddy," in colorful crayon. Inside, the mood felt different, lighter. The halls, though still busy, carried a new kind of energy, a cautious optimism. At the nurse's station, someone said quietly, "She's stabilizing. It's a miracle." Ethan's hand froze on the mop handle. "The general?" The nurse nodded. "She's responding to treatment now. Turns out it was some kind of allergic reaction." A slow smile spread across his face. He lowered his head slightly. Try not to let it show too much, but inside his chest ached with quiet relief. He whispered under his breath, "You're a fighter, ma'am." But relief didn't last long. Later that afternoon, a hospital administrator approached him in the hallway. "Mr. Cole," the man said, his tone neutral. "Dr. Vargas wants to see you in her office." Ethan's stomach tightened. He followed the man through the gleaming corridors, his mind spinning. Did I do something wrong? Maybe they found out he'd written that note. Maybe they thought he overstepped. He couldn't afford to lose his job, not with Sophie depending on him. When he entered the office, Dr. Vargas was standing by the window, her white coat draped over her chair. Her eyes looked weary but sharp. "Mr. Cole," she began, turning to face him, "I need to ask you something, and I'd like you to answer honestly." "Yes, ma'am." She held up a folded piece of paper. The note, check for latex allergy. It might explain her reactions. "Did you write this?" Ethan's throat went dry. His first instinct was to deny it, to protect himself. But lying had never come easily to him. He took a quiet breath. "Yes, ma'am, I did." Vargas raised an eyebrow. "And how did you come to that conclusion?" "I noticed red spots," he said carefully, "and I remembered seeing a note in her file about a latex allergy. I didn't want to interfere, but something didn't feel right." Vargas crossed her arms, studying him. "You're not medically trained, are you?" "No, ma'am. My wife was a nurse. She used to talk about these things sometimes. I just paid attention." The silence stretched between them. Finally, Vargas spoke, her tone softer. "Do you realize what could have happened if you were wrong?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I could have been fired. Maybe worse." "Then why risk it?" He hesitated, then looked her in the eye. "Because I've seen what happens when people stay quiet. And I've got a little girl at home who thinks heroes don't always wear uniforms. I guess I wanted to prove her right. Dr. Vargas's expression softened, just slightly. She sat down, the note still in her hand. "You were right, Mr. Cole," she said quietly. It was a latex reaction. "You saved her life." Ethan blinked. "I what?" "Your observation led us to test for histamine spikes. Without that note, we might never have checked. General Monroe is alive because you noticed what 22 doctors missed." The words hit him like a wave. Disbelief, relief, gratitude all tangled together. He didn't know what to say. "I just did what anyone would do." Vargas smiled faintly. "No, most people wouldn't have looked twice." She stood and extended her hand. "You did more than your job today, Mr. Cole. You reminded us of ours." He shook her hand, still stunned. That evening, Ethan drove home in a quiet daze. The sunset spread gold and pink across the city, washing everything in soft light. When he walked through the apartment door, Sophie ran up to him, her hair bouncing in loose curls. "Daddy, you're home." He scooped her up, laughing. "Yeah, pumpkin. I made it." She looked at him curiously. "You look happy." He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Someone I was worried about is getting better." "Did you help them?" she asked innocently. Ethan hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe a little." Sophie grinned. "Mommy would say you're a helper, Daddy." He hugged her tightly, emotion swelling in his chest. Yeah, maybe she would. Later that night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Ethan sat by the window with a cup of coffee gone cold. The lights of the city shimmered below, quiet and distant. He pulled out an old photo, Mia in her nurse's scrubs, smiling, tired but proud. He traced her face with his thumb. "You'd laugh if you knew, huh?" he whispered. "Your janitor husband telling doctors how to save a general." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "But you were right, like always. Healing starts when someone finally sees." The phone buzzed with a message from the hospital. General Monroe's condition stable. No further complications. "Thank you, H. Vargas." Ethan smiled faintly and set the phone down. Outside, a faint breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of rain and something else, renewal. In a hospital room miles away, the monitors beside General Monroe blinked steadily, their rhythm matching the quiet beat of life returning. Neither she nor the doctors yet knew the name of the man who'd noticed the truth, but fate had already decided their paths would cross again. And when they did, the world would know that even the smallest voice can change the course of a miracle. The morning sun spilled through the tall glass windows of Walter Reed, turning the sterile hallways golden. It was the kind of light that made even the most tired faces look softer, and for the first time in weeks, the hospital didn't feel like a battlefield. General Evelyn Monroe opened her eyes to that light. Slowly, carefully, the world came back to her in fragments. The beeping monitor, the faint scent of disinfectant, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. Her throat was dry, and her voice came out as a whisper. "Where am I?" A nurse rushed to her side, eyes wide with relief. "General Monroe, you're awake." The nurse pressed the call button. Within seconds, the room filled with movement, doctors, assistants, and Dr. Vargas herself. Monroe blinked, her mind still foggy. "What happened to me?" Dr. Vargas smiled, her voice warm and calm. "You had a severe allergic reaction, ma'am. But you're stable now. You're safe." Monroe frowned slightly. "Allergic? To what?" "Latex," Vargas said gently. "We believe it triggered a chain reaction that masked itself as a systemic infection. It wasn't easy to spot." The general's sharp eyes flickered. "And who found it?" Vargas hesitated for half a second, then smiled faintly. "Someone very observant." By midday, the entire hospital seemed to hum with the news. The general was awake. Staff paused mid-shift to share the update in hushed, grateful tones. Even the cafeteria line was filled with chatter, stories of miracles, second chances, and faith restored. Ethan Cole was mopping the floor outside the administrative wing when he overheard two nurses talking near the vending machine. "She's conscious now," one said. "Talking, even." It's unbelievable. Ethan froze mid-swipe. His hand tightened on the mop handle. "She's awake?" he asked softly. The nurse turned, surprised. "Oh, Mr. Cole." "Yes, this morning." The whole staff's relieved. He nodded slowly, heart pounding. That's good. Real good." He turned back to his mop, pretending to focus on the floor, but inside him a quiet storm raged. Disbelief, pride, gratitude. He didn't need recognition. He didn't want it. It was enough to know she'd lived. Later that afternoon, Dr. Vargas stepped out of Monroe's room with file in hand and spotted Ethan down the hall. "Mr. Cole," she called. He looked up, startled. "Ma'am, would you come with me, please?" He followed her through the corridor, a path he'd walked 1,000 times, though never like this. She stopped in front of room 214. Ethan's steps slowed. Through the glass, he saw General Monroe sitting upright, a blanket draped across her lap. Her hair was still tousled from sleep, but her presence filled the room. Even weakened, she radiated command. "Ma'am," Vargas said, stepping inside, "this is Mr. Ethan Cole, one of our janitorial staff." Ethan shifted awkwardly. "Ma'am." General Monroe's gaze met his. Her eyes, sharp gray, like steel tempered by life, studied him for a moment. "You," she said slowly, her voice gravelly but strong. "You were the one, weren't you?" Ethan blinked. "Ma'am." She smiled faintly. "The note, the warning." He hesitated. I just noticed something, that's all. I didn't mean to overstep." Monroe let out a weak but genuine laugh. "Overstep? Son, you saved a general of the United States Army. I think you've earned the right to step wherever you please." The room chuckled lightly. Even Dr. Vargas smiled. Monroe gestured toward the chair beside her bed. "Sit down, Mr. Cole. You're the first man I've met who outranked 22 doctors in one night." Ethan flushed. "I just did what anyone would, ma'am." Her expression softened. "No, most people wouldn't have seen what you saw. You paid attention, and that's something the world needs more of." He looked down, voice quiet. "I just kept thinking what my wife would have done. She was a nurse. Always told me that saving a life isn't about knowing everything. It's about noticing what others don't." For a moment, silence hung in the room, gentle, respectful. Then Monroe reached out a hand. Her grip firm despite the 4-line taped to her wrist. "Then you honored her well." Ethan swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. "Thank you, ma'am." "No," she said softly. "Thank you." By evening, the story had spread through official channels. Reports were filed. The chain of command took notice. When word reached the Department of Defense, a request came down from the top. Identify and recognize the civilian responsible for General Monroe's stabilization. Ethan had no idea about any of it. He was back to sweeping the West Wing, humming softly to himself, when his supervisor appeared, red-faced and breathless. "Cole, they're looking for you in administration. Right now." Ethan frowned. "Did I do something wrong?" "Wrong," the supervisor sputtered. "You saved a general. Now move." The conference room upstairs was full. Doctors, nurses, military officers, even a few reporters. Cameras flashed. The American flag stood in one corner, its colors rich in the afternoon light. When Ethan entered, the room went quiet. General Monroe stood at the front, still pale but proud in her uniform, medals gleaming against her chest. She smiled as he approached. "Mr. Cole," she said into the microphone, "you don't know me, but you saw me. When 22 of the best minds in medicine couldn't find the answer, you did, because you cared enough to look twice." Ethan froze, his heart pounding as she continued. "You reminded us that rank, education, and titles mean nothing without humanity. You saw not a general, but a person who needed help, and for that this country owes you more than words." The audience stood, a slow, rising ovation. Cameras clicked. Applause thundered. Ethan blinked hard, his throat thick. He whispered, I just wanted her to live." Monroe stepped closer, pinning a small gold badge to his uniform shirt. It read, "Honorary Commendation for Bravery and Service." As she leaned in, she whispered, "For your daughter. Tell her dad's a hero." Ethan swallowed, nodding silently. That night, as the city lights flickered below, Ethan and Sophie sat on their tiny balcony, sharing grilled cheese sandwiches and chocolate milk. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Daddy, did you really save a general?" He smiled, brushing a crumb from her cheek. "I just helped someone who needed it, sweetheart." She thought for a moment, then grinned. "That's what heroes do." He laughed softly, pulling her close. "Maybe you're right." The stars glimmered overhead, and for once, everything felt right. Quiet, simple, miraculous. The days that followed the ceremony passed like a dream. Newspapers ran the story across the country. Single-dad janitor saves four-star general. News anchors called it a miracle of compassion. But for Ethan Cole, life hadn't changed much. He still clocked in early, still packed Sophie's lunch, still hummed quietly while pushing his mop through the hospital halls. Except now. People smiled when they passed him. Nurses stopped to say good morning. Patients waved. And sometimes he caught glimpses of soldiers saluting him in quiet respect. It embarrassed him a little. But deep down, he felt something he hadn't in years, pride. Not the loud kind that comes with medals or headlines, but the gentle, grounding kind that makes you stand taller when your daughter looks up to you. A week later, General Evelyn Monroe returned to duty, thinner, paler, but alive. When she stepped into the hospital's East Wing, the staff stood straighter. She had always been known for her precision, her steel discipline, but now there was something softer in her eyes, gratitude that ran deep. She stopped outside the janitor's closet, where Ethan was wringing out a mop. "Mr. Cole," she said. He waved back, heart swelling. That evening, after the ceremony, Ethan and Monroe stepped outside onto the hospital balcony. The city lights shimmered below like fallen stars. Monroe folded her arms, watching the horizon. "You know," she said quietly, "before all this happened, I'd forgotten what real service meant. You reminded me." Ethan smiled faintly. "Guess we both learned something, ma'am." She nodded. "You saved my life, Ethan. I won't forget that." He looked up at the sky, the same sky Mia used to watch from their old porch. "Just doing what I was taught," he said softly. "See the person, not the problem." Monroe extended her hand once more. "Then the world could use more men like you." They shook hands, the kind of handshake that carried a promise, respect, gratitude, friendship. Later that night, Ethan and Sophie stood by the river near their apartment. The metal glimmered faintly under the streetlight. Sophie tugged his sleeve. "Daddy?" "Yeah, pumpkin?" She pointed to the stars. "Mommy's watching, right?" He smiled, pulling her close. "Always." She giggled. "Then she's probably really proud you saved the general." Ethan chuckled softly, tears pricking his eyes. "Nah," he whispered. "She's proud I kept my promise." "What promise?" He looked down at her, his voice gentle. "To never stop helping people, no matter who they are." They stood there in silence, the city humming softly around them, the river gliding like glass beneath the moon. Above them, the stars shimmered brighter, quiet witnesses to a man who proved that sometimes the smallest act of courage can echo louder than any medal ever could. The story of Ethan Cole spread far beyond the hospital walls. News stations called it the miracle at Walter Reed. But to those who knew the truth, it wasn't about miracles at all. It was about humanity. A janitor who refused to look away. A general who learned to see again. A nation reminded that the greatest acts of service often come from the quietest hands. Weeks turned into months. The medal rested in a modest frame on Ethan's kitchen wall, right beside Sophie's crayon drawings of Mia's old nursing photo. It wasn't polished often, dust settled on it. Sunlight faded its shine, but that didn't matter, because its meaning wasn't in the medal. It was in the memory. Every morning before school, Sophie would glance at it, her small eyes wide with pride. "That's Daddy's medal." She'd tell anyone who listened, "He saved a general." And every time she said it, Ethan would smile, not because of the glory, but because she believed in the kind of world her mother had once dreamed of, a world where kindness mattered more than titles. At Walter Reed, General Evelyn Monroe made good on her word. She launched Project Vigil, a national initiative dedicated to recognizing the unseen heroes, janitors, paramedics, cafeteria workers, and volunteers who made quiet differences in patients' lives. At the program's inauguration, she stood at the podium and said, "We measure strength in stars and medals, but maybe we've been looking the wrong direction. True courage isn't loud. It's the whisper in the hallway that changes everything. One man's attention saved my life. Let's make sure no one's compassion goes unnoticed again." The audience rose to their feet, applause thunderous, many with tears in their eyes. Behind the curtain, Ethan watched, holding Sophie's hand. He didn't want to be on stage, not anymore. The light wasn't where he belonged. He preferred the quiet, the corners, the spaces where real work happened unseen. Still, he felt something stirred deep within him, gratitude, purpose, maybe even peace. That night, after the event, the three of them, Ethan, Sophie, and General Monroe, shared a quiet dinner at a small diner on the outskirts of town. Monroe, now a close family friend, laughed softly as Sophie told her about school. "You know," she said, sipping her coffee, "your dad's becoming quite the legend." Sophie grinned proudly. "He's my hero." Ethan smiled, shaking his head. "Heroes are just people who keep showing up." Monroe met his gaze and said quietly, "Then the world needs more people who show up like you, Mr. Cole." As time passed, Ethan began his training with the Department of Defense Medical Support Unit. He wasn't a janitor anymore, not officially, but he never stopped cleaning up after others. He still picked up fallen papers in hallways, still offered smiles to frightened patients, still carried spare gloves in his pocket, because he knew the truth now, that real change doesn't start with grand gestures. It starts with noticing, and he noticed everything. When a soldier trembled before surgery, he sat beside him and said, "You'll be okay." When a nurse worked a double shift, he brought her coffee without being asked. When a family cried in the waiting room, he found words that didn't sound like comfort, but felt like it. Ethan didn't chase medals anymore. He lived the message behind them. Years later, Sophie would grow up to become a doctor, one who listened more than she spoke. On her office wall, next to her medical degree, hung a small framed photo of her father holding that silver medal, smiling humbly, eyes kind. Patients often asked about it, and she always said the same thing. "That's my dad. He taught me that saving lives isn't just about knowing medicine. It's about paying attention to the person in front of you." On a quiet evening, long after the applause faded and the camera stopped flashing, Ethan stood by the river again, the same spot where he once promised his daughter he'd always help people. The water glimmered under moonlight, just like that night when everything changed. He closed his eyes, hearing Mia's voice in the wind. Healing starts when someone finally sees. He smiled softly. "I see, love," he whispered. "Always." Then he turned, walking home, where Sophie was waiting, where tomorrow still held work to be done, and where the legacy of one small act of courage would live on quietly, endlessly. The Yendi, a story of honor, humanity, and hope,